It's another week in the books of football. Now looking ahead to the next week, starting with college football, week 3. Not too many games, to be honest with you, to pay too much attention to this week. Week 4 definitely looks a whole lot better, but this week we picked South Carolina and Georgia. Bulldogs, this is really the first team that they're playing this year. They played two very good teams the past 2 weeks in Ball State and Tennessee Martin. So very impressive there for Georgia. And South Carolina coming off a win against Furman and a loss against UNC. Unfortunately, I do think Georgia will still continue their winning streak to start the season, even as a South Carolina fan and grad. South Carolina, I don't know, man. That North Carolina game really just kind of rubbed me the wrong way with how they played. The biggest positive right now is Spencer Rattler. I mean, he's been playing really well. I think he's at like 80% completion percentage or something like that for this season. So, funnily enough, I mean, that's really the biggest and best thing about South Carolina right now. But yeah, I would say they'll keep it somewhat close. But yeah, definitely, I think Georgia's going to win the game. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's hard to pick South Carolina on this one. Rattler's going to give them a show. I think this is going to be their hardest opponent for Georgia. And it's going to be South Carolina's hardest opponent so far, too. But I think that the way that the O-line has been for South Carolina is not super convincing.
Yeah.
I mean, the game against UNC was a good show of that. So Georgia is probably going to have a little bit of a field day there, but I think Rattler will at least make it exciting. I don't expect like a major blowout, but we could very well be on track for that. Going from there, we have our NFL games for this week that we're going to be picking between. One of them is going to be happening tonight as of the day we're recording. That's going to be the Minnesota Vikings, I almost said Timberwolves, versus the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a rematch from last year. It was one of the only games for the Vikings last year that didn't have like a weird atmosphere around it where it was somehow a 1-point game and the Vikings squeaked out at the end. They got like crushed by the Eagles last year. And unfortunately, I think it's not going to be any different. I think that the Vikings are going to be in a tough position here. They played well ish against the Buccaneers. As well as that game was, it was kind of a weird game between the two of them. It's pretty normal for the Vikings, I guess. But the Eagles had a weird second half against the Patriots. But I think that they'll be able to get it out against Minnesota. I don't really expect Minnesota to get crushed again. I think after last week's loss, we'll see a more rejuvenated Vikings team fighting for a win. But I don't expect to see it coming as the Eagles this week.
Yeah, you could put the Timberwolves out there too. Right? It wouldn't matter. Picking the Eagles as well. I think the biggest issue, for the Vikings, and people have talked about this morning ahead of the game, you got your starting center out and Christian Darrisaw, your tackle. He's questionable coming into the game. And despite the Eagles having, Fletcher Cox, he's questionable, and the Kobe Dean's on IR right now. Bradbury in the back end, he's out. Despite that, you still got a lot of dogs on that defensive line and that front seven. So that's going to be the biggest issue for them. Even with all the changes for the Eagles in the offseason, they still have so many guys up there. It's ridiculous. And then they added Jalen Carter as well and Nolan Smith in the drafts. I mean, that defensive line and that front seven as a whole is just great, amazing. So that's probably going to be their biggest issue. And their running game is definitely going to have to be a lot better. Alexander Madison only had 34 yards rushing last week. So that's going to be an issue for them. You still got offensive weapons, of course, at the wide receiver position, tight end position, TJ Hawkinson, Justin Jefferson. But yeah, I'm going with you as well, picking the Eagles in this one. Even though they won last week, I say bounce back offensively. Now moving over to a AFC North matchup, we got the Ravens and the Bengals. Both of us are picking the Baltimore Ravens in this one. Ravens had a good game against the Texans last week. Not fantastic. Wasn't the best game, but they got the job done. Obviously, the Bengals had a rough game, to say the least, against the Cleveland Browns. I would say the Cincinnati Bengals should bounce back, but I think the Ravens right now showed us a little bit more last week. I think it'll be a little bit closer, 23-17 Ravens for me.
Yeah, I don't expect the the Bengals to come out and put up 3 points again. But I'm gonna pick the Ravens on this one. I think there's a little more to see there. I'm excited to see maybe the passing game get a little more elevated for the Ravens this time. I mean, Zay Flowers did well last week, 78 yards on 9 receptions. But there was no passing touchdowns for the Ravens. So I'd like to see a little more of that get going, and I think we will. So I think, yeah, 27-17, even 24-17, somewhere around that. A close game between these two gritty rivals, but one that I think the Ravens can pull out. They had an exciting playoff game last season that ended in a crazy fumble recovery, and that was with Tyler Huntley in. So now, Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson being back, I think we're going to see a good game, and I think that the Ravens can take this one. From there, we move to another playoff matchup from last year. We have the Chiefs and the Jags, and this is Terrence and I's first split of the season, I believe. So I'm going first, and I probably have the controversial pick on this one. I'm going to say that I think the Jags can take it. It's just sort of a weird gut feeling. They had a weird playoff game with some injury questions last year. We don't really know how much Chris Jones is playing. I don't think that'll affect it. He is going to play, and I think he'll play enough to be impactful. I think this will be a close game too. They had a fun game last year. Now they've got a little bit better. They've got Calvin Ridley, of course, had a great game against the Colts last week. Trevor Lawrence looking good. Travis Etienne did well. So I think we're going to have a fun game. I don't expect this to be a blowout in either direction. I think that the Jags can maybe catch the Chiefs off guard and take them out in a close matchup. Maybe like a 3-point swing, 31-28, something like that. Maybe not quite that high scoring. But I don't know. It feels really weird to call the Chiefs going down 0-2 to start the season, especially since they still have Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and all that. But I got a feeling, and I'm gonna go with it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that controversial. I think it's entirely possible for the Jaguars to win this one. We saw they played against them in the playoff game. Obviously, now with Chris Jones signing that deal, again, you mentioned it, we don't know specifically how much he'll be able to play, but I think he'll be fine. I'm not really worried too much about conditioning for him. So if he's playing like at least half the snaps or something, he's definitely going to be making an impact on that defensive line. And his main job is obviously going to be try to force Trevor Lawrence to make some mistakes. And for the Chiefs offensively, they got to figure out something with these receivers. Obviously, Travis Kelce seems like he's going to be coming back. I expect him to. He's questionable right now. But if he does come back, it's pretty obvious who the main target is going to be. But you can't expect Travis Kelce to do everything here. The receivers are definitely going to have to step up. And I think with this week, they obviously had some time to kind of figure things out. But they're still in the feelers in the early part of the season. So I don't expect a complete turnaround from last week for the receivers for the Chiefs, but they're going to be better this week, I think. And they'll have to be able to beat the Jags. So I'm going with the Chiefs, but that's more of a 51% one way, 49% the other way. So I definitely think the Jags will keep it close in that one. And then the last game, as mentioned before, we talked about the Jets having all these national TV games, all these primetime games because of the Aaron Rodgers move. But now, obviously, with Zach Wilson leading the helm, this one probably is swung a little bit more towards the Cowboys direction, as we were both picking the Cowboys in this one. We just saw the Cowboys absolutely dismantle the other New York team last week. I don't think they'll come out and 40-0 them. But I think the Cowboys offense, who they didn't have an amazing game last week. They didn't need to, especially from Dak Prescott. But I think they'll be able to come out in this one and kind of, I don't want to say bounce back because they did still win, but kind of have a bounce back game, show a little bit more of that passing game. And for the Jets, again, the main thing is not having Zach Wilson try to do too much, try to run the ball and play good defense. And obviously your main thing, not to harp on Dak, but the main thing you want is to force Dak to turn the ball over. If they're able to do that, then I think the Jets can try to pull one out, but I just have more confidence in the Cowboys. So I will be going with them.
Yeah, that Cowboys defense put on a show against a Giants offense that I would say, aside from their O-line, is decently talented. And so I think that they're going to. It's a tougher challenge against the Jets offense. I do think the Jets have a better offense, maybe aside from quarterback. But that's not to say Zach Wilson is like bad. So I think the Cowboys defense is going to have a little more of a fight against the Jets. I don't expect a 40-0 game, but I do think that it'll be a pretty good game for this Cowboys defense to get some reps against a tougher team. And I think that Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb is going to be a hard trio for the Jets to hold down, harder than maybe the Bills, since Josh Allen kind of zeroed in on Stephon Diggs, whereas the Cowboys definitely use their run game a little more. And Dak is not always the most tunnel vision quarterback. He's got he maybe get Brandon Cooks a little more involved in the offense this season or this game. So I think the Jets will put up a decent fight. It might not be a close scoreline, but I don't think they'll look as bad as the Giants did against this defense. And I think that their defense will be able to make the Cowboys look. I guess the Cowboys' offense wasn't the most outstanding thing last week either. So I think we'll be in for a good game, but I think the Cowboys come out with probably a decent win.